Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez had served 3 tours in Iraq, but nothing had prepared her for what would happen in Fallujah that scorching October morning. The 28-year-old combat medic from El Paso, Texas, had volunteered for the dangerous mission to evacuate wounded civilians from a bombed-out hospital in the heart of the city's most volatile district. The convoy of 4 armored vehicles moved through the narrow streets at dawn, when the air was still cool and the insurgent activity typically at its lowest. Maria sat in the second vehicle, her medical kit secured beside her, mentally reviewing the evacuation procedures she had practiced countless times. Her team leader, Sergeant First Class Thompson, had briefed them on the intelligence reports showing minimal enemy presence in the target area, but intelligence reports could be wrong, and in Fallujah, wrong information meant death. The hospital stood like a concrete skeleton against the orange sky, its windows blown out from previous attacks, debris scattered across what used to be the main entrance. The building had been abandoned by most medical staff weeks earlier, but desperate civilians still brought their wounded there, hoping for any kind of help. Maria's job was to assess the injured and coordinate their transport to the secure medical facility at the forward operating base. As the convoy approached the hospital compound, everything seemed eerily quiet. No movement in the surrounding buildings. No sound except the rumble of their engines and the distant call to prayer echoing from a nearby mosque. Maria checked her equipment one final time, ensuring her trauma supplies were easily accessible. She had saved dozens of lives in her previous deployments, both American soldiers and Iraqi civilians, earning her the respect of everyone in her unit. The vehicles came to a halt outside the hospital's main gate. Through her window, Maria could see the makeshift triage area where local volunteers had arranged the wounded on stretchers and blankets. An elderly Iraqi man approached their vehicle, gesturing frantically toward the building where more casualties waited inside. The scene was heartbreaking but familiar, the cost of war written in blood and broken bodies. Sergeant Thompson gave the signal to dismount. Maria grabbed her medical kit and stepped out into the oppressive heat, immediately scanning the area for potential threats while her mind shifted into medical mode. The smell hit her first, a mixture of antiseptic, blood, and the acrid smoke that seemed to permanently hang over the city. She had learned to compartmentalize these sensory assaults, focusing instead on the lives she could save. The elderly Iraqi man introduced himself as Dr. Hassan, a retired physician who had been volunteering at the abandoned hospital. His English was broken, but his urgency was clear. He led Maria toward a group of injured children, their small bodies bearing the terrible marks of an improvised explosive device that had detonated near their school the previous evening. Their families had carried them through dangerous streets, hoping against hope that help would come. Maria knelt beside the first child, a boy no older than 8, his leg badly mangled but his eyes still bright with life. She began her assessment, speaking softly in the few Arabic words she had learned, trying to comfort him while determining the severity of his injuries. The boy would need immediate surgery, but he would live if they could get him to the base hospital in time. As she worked, Maria felt the familiar surge of purpose that had driven her to become a medic. These moments, when her training and compassion could make the difference between life and death, reminded her why she had enlisted in the first place. Despite the danger, despite being thousands of miles from home, she was exactly where she needed to be. The other members of her team had spread out through the compound, securing the perimeter while she and the other medics triaged the wounded. The evacuation was proceeding smoothly, just as they had practiced. Within an hour, they would have loaded all the critical cases into the medical evacuation vehicles and begun the journey back to safety. But as Maria prepared the injured boy for transport, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. In the windows of the buildings across the street, she caught the brief glint of metal, sunlight reflecting off rifle barrels. Her training kicked in immediately and she began calculating distances and cover options, but she also realized, with growing dread, that they were completely exposed in the hospital courtyard. The attack, when it came, would be swift and devastating. But in these final moments of relative peace, Maria continued her work, unaware that she was about to face the fight of her life, one that would test every ounce of her courage, training, and will to survive. The bullets were coming and there would be nowhere to run. Lieutenant Commander Jake Phoenix. Morrison received the emergency briefing at 0200 hours on the third day of Maria Rodriguez's ordeal. The SEAL Team 6 leader stood in the Tactical Operations Center aboard the USS Bataan, studying satellite imagery of Fallujah while his team gathered around the digital planning table. The mission parameters were unlike anything they had encountered before: extract a critically wounded American soldier from deep inside enemy territory. With no guarantee she was still alive, the intelligence was fragmentary at best. An Iraqi police captain had reported contact with a local doctor claiming to have an injured American in an abandoned hospital. The location was in one of Fallujah's most dangerous districts, an area where insurgents had been operating freely for weeks. Every approach route would take them through multiple layers of enemy positions, and the target building itself was likely under surveillance. "Sir, this could easily be a trap," warned Chief Petty Officer Marcus Boole Thompson, the team's senior enlisted member. "The insurgents have been trying to lure our forces into ambush for months. They know we won't abandon wounded personnel." The concern was valid. Several American units had walked into carefully planned traps while attempting rescue operations, but Morrison had served with Maria Rodriguez during his previous deployment. She had saved the life of one of his teammates, working under fire to stabilize a SEAL who had been critically wounded during a direct action mission. The image of the fearless medic, covered in blood but refusing to give up on her patient, was burned into his memory. If there was even a chance she was alive, he would not leave her behind. The mission planning took 6 hours. Morrison's team of 12 SEALs would insert by helicopter at a landing zone 3 kilometers from the target, then move through the city on foot using night vision and thermal imaging to avoid insurgent patrols. The approach would require them to cross through at least 4 enemy-controlled checkpoints and navigate an urban maze where every building could hide snipers or improvised explosive devices. Timing was critical. The rescue had to occur during the narrow window between 0300 and 0500 hours, when insurgent activity typically decreased and American air support could provide overhead cover without risking civilian casualties. The SEALs would have exactly 30 minutes inside the target building before extraction helicopters would arrive to pull them out. As dawn approached on the third day, Morrison led his team through final equipment checks. Each SEAL carried specialized gear for urban combat, suppressed weapons, breaching charges, medical supplies, and communications equipment that would allow them to coordinate with overhead surveillance assets. They had trained for missions like this hundreds of times, but never with such uncertain intelligence and such high stakes. The helicopter insertion went perfectly. 2 of 6 little birds dropped the SEALs at their landing zone exactly on schedule, disappearing into the night sky within seconds to avoid detection. Morrison's team immediately moved out in tactical formation, using hand signals and night vision to navigate through the rubble-strewn streets of Fallujah. The city at night was an alien landscape of shadows and silence. Buildings that had once housed families and businesses now stood like broken teeth against the sky, their walls pockmarked with bullet holes and rocket impacts. The SEALs moved like ghosts through this wasteland, their training allowing them to cover ground quickly while remaining invisible to any watching eyes. The first checkpoint appeared. Ahead, a roadblock manned by 3 insurgent fighters smoking cigarettes and talking quietly in Arabic. Morrison hand-signaled for his team to hold position while he studied the enemy positions. Taking out the guards would be simple, but gunfire would alert other insurgent forces in the area. Instead, he opted for a longer route that would add 15 minutes to their approach but preserve the element of surprise. They bypassed 3 more checkpoints using similar tactics, working their way closer to the hospital through back alleys and abandoned buildings. Morrison's point man, Petty Officer First Class Danny "Ghost" Ramirez, used thermal imaging to identify potential threats, marking sniper positions and patrol routes that the team would need to avoid on their return journey. As they neared the target building, Morrison felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came before direct action. Through his night vision scope, he could see the hospital standing exactly as described in their intelligence briefing. The building appeared abandoned, but thermal imaging revealed heat signatures in the basement level, either insurgents using it as a base, or possibly the rescue target they had come to find. Morrison positioned his team around the hospital perimeter, with overwatch elements covering all possible escape routes. He then led a 4-man entry team toward the main entrance, moving in the practiced rhythm that had made SEAL Team 6 legendary. Each step was calculated, each movement designed to minimize noise and maximize tactical advantage. The hospital's interior was a maze of debris and medical equipment scattered by previous battles. Morrison's team used flashlights equipped with infrared filters, invisible to the naked eye but clear through their night vision goggles. They began systematically clearing rooms, looking for any sign of the wounded American soldier they had come to find. The basement stairwell was partially collapsed, forcing the SEALs to navigate carefully through the rubble. As they descended, Morrison could hear voices speaking in hushed Arabic tones. His Arabic was limited, but he caught enough words to understand they were discussing someone's medical condition. Hope began building in his chest. They might actually be in Tyne Dot at the bottom of the stairs. Morrison's team took positions outside a storage room where the thermal signatures were strongest. Through a crack in the door, he could see an elderly man changing bandages on someone lying on a makeshift stretcher. The patient appeared to be wearing American military fatigues, though the fabric was stained with blood and torn by bullet holes. Morrison made his decision. Instead of bursting through the door with weapons drawn, he knocked softly and called out in his basic Arabic, identifying himself as an American soldier. The voices inside the room went silent, then erupted in excited whispers. Seconds later, the door opened to reveal Dr. Hassan, his face showing a mixture of relief and exhaustion behind the elderly doctor. Lying on a stretcher improvised from hospital equipment was Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez. She was unconscious and appeared to be barely breathing, but she was unmistakably alive. Morrison felt a surge of emotion that he quickly suppressed. The mission was only half complete, and the most dangerous part was yet to come. Dr. Hassan had seen death many times during his 40 years as a physician, but he refused to let it claim the young American woman who had risked her life to save an Iraqi child. As gunfire continued to echo through the hospital corridors, the elderly doctor worked with desperate determination to keep Maria alive. Using whatever medical supplies he could find in the abandoned facility, the hospital's emergency generator had failed weeks ago, leaving Hassan to work by the dim light filtering through broken windows. He had managed to drag Maria into a storage room in the basement, away from the windows where insurgent snipers might spot them. The concrete walls provided some protection from stray bullets, but the room felt more like a tomb than a treatment facility. Maria's pulse was barely detectable, and her breathing had become so shallow that Hassan had to lean close to her chest to confirm she was still alive. The 14 gunshot wounds had caused massive trauma to her body, damaged organs, severed blood vessels, and shattered bones that would challenge even a fully equipped trauma center. Yet somehow, incredibly, none of the bullets had struck any immediately fatal areas. Working by flashlight, Hassan began the impossible task of stabilizing his patient. He had no blood for transfusions, no proper surgical instruments, and no anesthesia. What he did have was a lifetime of experience, steady hands despite his 72 years, and an unshakable belief that every life was worth saving. Regardless of nationality or uniform, the first priority was stopping the bleeding. Hassan tore strips from hospital bed sheets to create pressure bandages, applying them to the worst wounds while whispering prayers in Arabic. The bullet wound to Maria's abdomen worried him most. He could see signs of internal bleeding that he couldn't address without proper surgery. But he did what he could, packing the wound and hoping her young, strong body could compensate for what his limited resources couldn't provide. Throughout that first night, Hassan never left Maria's side. He monitored her vital signs with an old blood pressure cuff he had found in a supply closet, adjusting her position to prevent fluid from accumulating in her lungs. When her breathing became too labored, he performed mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, pushing life back into her failing body through sheer force of will. The building around them had grown quiet as the insurgents finally withdrew. But Hassan knew they would return. The fighters often used abandoned buildings like this as staging areas, and the presence of an injured American soldier would make the hospital an even more attractive target. He would need to keep Maria hidden while somehow getting word to American forces about her location. On the second morning, Hassan made a dangerous decision. He left Maria in the care of two local women who had been sheltering in the hospital's basement: Fatima, a nurse who had worked at the facility before the fighting intensified, and Zara, a mother whose own child had been treated by Maria during the evacuation. Both women had seen the American soldier risk her life to save Iraqi civilians, and they were determined to repay that kindness. Hassan ventured out into the dangerous streets of Fallujah, seeking a way to contact American forces. The city was a maze of rubble and checkpoints, patrolled by insurgent fighters who would kill him without hesitation if they suspected he was helping the enemy. But Hassan knew the city better than most. He had delivered babies and treated injuries in these neighborhoods for decades. He made his way to the shop of Ahmed, an old friend who ran a small electronics repair business. Ahmed had managed to keep a satellite phone hidden from the insurgents, using it occasionally to contact relatives outside the city. Hassan explained the situation, and despite the enormous risk, Ahmed agreed to help make contact with American forces. The first attempts failed completely. The phone numbers Hassan had memorized were for the main military hospital, but the lines were constantly busy or disconnected. Hours passed as they tried different approaches, knowing that every minute could be Maria's last. Finally, Ahmed suggested trying to reach an Iraqi police commander who was known to cooperate with American forces. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, Fatima and Zara worked tirelessly to keep Maria alive. They had found a small cache of medical supplies hidden in a doctor's office: 4 fluids, antibiotics, and pain medication that had been left behind during the evacuation. Fatima, drawing on her nursing experience, established an intravenous line and began slowly replacing the fluids Maria had lost to bleeding. Zara, who spoke some English, sat beside Maria and talked to her continuously, believing that familiar voices could sometimes call people back from the edge of death. She told Maria about her own children, about life in Fallujah before the war, about her dreams for peace. Whether Maria could hear her or not, Zara's gentle presence seemed to have a calming effect on the dying soldier. Late on the second day, Hassan finally made contact with Captain Ahmad Halil of the Iraqi police, who maintained radio communication with American forces in the area. The conversation was brief and coded. Hassan couldn't risk saying too much over an unsecured line, but he managed to convey that an injured American was hidden in the old hospital and needed immediate evacuation. Captain Halil faced his own dilemma. The hospital was in contested territory, controlled by insurgents who had proven capable of shooting down helicopters. Any rescue attempt would be extremely dangerous and might result in even more casualties. But the code of honor that existed among warriors, regardless of nationality, demanded that he try to save the wounded. American soldier. As the sun set on Maria's second day in the basement of the abandoned hospital, her 3 Iraqi guardians maintained their vigil. Her condition had stabilized somewhat, the bleeding had mostly stopped, and her vital signs had improved slightly with the 4 fluids. But time was running out. Without proper medical care, infection would soon set in, and her already weakened body wouldn't be able to fight it off. Dr. Hassan checked his watch and offered another prayer. Somewhere out in the darkness, he hoped, American soldiers were preparing to risk their own lives to save one of their own. The rescue, if it came at all, would have to happen soon. Maria Rodriguez had survived 14 bullets and 2 days in hell, but her strength was fading fast. In the distance, the sound of helicopter rotors began to echo through the night sky. Hassan looked up hopefully, wondering if salvation was finally approaching, or if the sound meant more fighting was about to engulf their fragile sanctuary. The first shot shattered the morning silence like thunder, and Maria immediately threw herself over the wounded boy she had been treating. The bullet struck the concrete wall behind her, sending fragments of stone flying through the air. Within seconds, the entire hospital courtyard erupted in chaos as automatic weapons fire poured down from multiple directions. Contact! Contact! Multiple shooters in the buildings to the north and east. Sergeant Thompson's voice cut through the gunfire as he dove behind their armored vehicle. The insurgents had chosen their ambush point perfectly. The Americans were trapped in an open courtyard with minimal cover, surrounded on three sides by multi-story buildings that provided perfect sniper positions. Maria's training took over completely. Even as bullets struck the ground around her, she continued shielding the injured child while scanning for the nearest substantial cover. The hospital's main entrance was only 30 feet away, but it might as well have been 30 miles given the intensity of the crossfire. She could hear the distinctive crack of AK-47 rounds mixing with the deeper sound of heavier weapons. "Maria! Get to the building, now!" Thompson shouted, laying down suppressing fire with his M4 rifle. The other soldiers in their unit had taken positions behind their vehicles and were returning fire, but they were vastly outnumbered. The hospital compound had become a killing field. Without hesitation, Maria scooped up the wounded boy and began running toward the hospital entrance, zigzagging to make herself a harder target. The child, barely conscious, clung to her with what little strength he had left. Behind her, she could hear Dr. Hassan calling out in Arabic, trying to get the other wounded civilians to safety. She was halfway to the entrance when the first bullet found her. It struck her left shoulder, spinning her around and nearly causing her to drop the boy. The pain was immediate and intense, but her adrenaline kept her moving. She adjusted her grip on the child and continued toward the doorway. Even as she felt warm blood soaking through her uniform, the second bullet caught her in the thigh, buckling her left leg and sending her stumbling forward. She managed to stay upright through sheer determination, but she could feel her strength beginning to fade. The hospital entrance was so close now, just 10 more steps. She could see Dr. Hassan inside, his arms outstretched, ready to take the wounded boy from her. Bullets 3 and 4 struck almost simultaneously, one grazing her ribs, the other punching through her right arm. The impact sent fresh waves of agony through her body, but somehow she kept moving. The boy in her arms had become unconscious, and she feared he might be bleeding out from wounds she hadn't had time to properly assess. She reached the hospital entrance, just as bullet 5 shattered her left collarbone. The force of the impact drove her to her knees, but she managed to push the boy into Dr. Hassan's waiting arms before collapsing inside the doorway. The elderly physician immediately began dragging both Maria and the child deeper into the building, away from the windows where stray rounds continued to strike. The firefight outside intensified as more insurgents joined the battle. Maria could hear Thompson coordinating with headquarters, calling for immediate backup and medical evacuation. But she also heard something that made her heart sink. One of their vehicles had been disabled by rocket-propelled grenade fire, and the remaining trucks were taking heavy damage. Bullets 6 through 10 found her as she tried to crawl deeper into the hospital corridor. The insurgents had moved to new positions, allowing them to fire through the building's broken windows. Each impact felt like being hit with a sledgehammer, and she could taste blood in her mouth. Her vision began to blur as shock set in, but her medical training told her she was going into hypovolemic shock from blood loss. Dr. Hassan appeared beside her, his weathered hands already working to apply pressure to her worst wounds. In broken English mixed with Arabic, he tried to reassure her while shouting instructions to other volunteers who had taken shelter in the building. Maria tried to speak, to tell him about the medical supplies in her kit, but only managed to whisper his name. The 11th bullet struck her abdomen, and she knew immediately that this was the worst one yet. She could feel internal bleeding beginning, a sensation she had learned to recognize from treating other wounded soldiers. Her breathing became shallow and rapid as her body began shutting down non-essential functions to preserve her heart and brain. Through the haze of pain and blood loss, she could hear the battle raging outside. American voices called out tactical commands while insurgent fighters shouted back and forth in Arabic. The sound of helicopter rotors in the distance gave her a brief moment of hope. Perhaps reinforcements were finally arriving, but bullets 12, 13, and 14 arrived before any rescue could reach her. Each one found gaps in her body armor, systematically destroying tissue and organs with ruthless efficiency. By the time the 14th round struck her lower back, Maria Rodriguez had lost consciousness. Her life hanging by the thinnest of threads. Dr. Hassan worked frantically to keep her alive, using his limited supplies and decades of medical experience to stem the bleeding from multiple gunshot wounds. Around him, the hospital had become a war zone, with insurgent fighters now attempting to storm the building to finish off any survivors. Outside, Sergeant Thompson made the agonizing decision to retreat with his surviving team members. They had held their position for over an hour, but ammunition was running low and casualty evacuation helicopters couldn't land in the ongoing firefight. With a heavy heart, he gave the order to fall back, leaving Maria behind in what everyone assumed would become her tomb. As the American vehicles pulled away under heavy fire, Maria lay dying on the concrete floor of an abandoned Iraqi hospital, 14 bullets having torn through her body. In the chaos of war, she had become another casualty, another name that would be added to the growing list of heroes who had given everything in service to their country and fellow human beings. The moment Lieutenant Commander Morrison laid eyes on Maria Rodriguez, his years of combat experience told him she was dying. The medic who had saved countless lives now needed a miracle to save her own. Her skin was pale and clammy, her breathing shallow and irregular, and the makeshift bandages covering her wounds were soaked with blood that had seeped through despite Dr. Hassan's heroic efforts. "How long has she been like this?" Morrison asked Hassan in broken Arabic while his team's medic, Petty Officer Second Class Kevin, Doc Williams, immediately began assessing Maria's condition. Williams had trained as a Navy corpsman before becoming a SEAL, and his face grew grim as he checked her vital signs. 3 days, Hassan replied in English, his voice heavy with exhaustion. 14 bullets. I stopped the bleeding, but she needs surgery. Soon or she dies. The elderly Iraqi doctor had clearly given everything he had to keep Maria alive. Working with minimal supplies and no proper equipment, Williams quickly established a new 4-line and began administering emergency medications to stabilize Maria's blood pressure and heart rate. "Commander, her pulse is thready and weak. She's lost a massive amount of blood and probably has internal injuries I can't assess here. We need to get her to a trauma center immediately or we're going to lose her." Morrison keyed his radio to contact the extraction team. "Phoenix 1 to Nightbird, package is secured but critical condition. We need immediate medical evacuation." The response crackled back through his earpiece. The extraction helicopters were still 20 minutes out, and insurgent activity in the area was increasing rapidly. The SEALs faced an agonizing decision. Maria was too unstable to survive a 20-minute wait, but moving her through the streets of Fallujah in her condition could kill her just as certainly. Morrison looked at the faces of his team, hardened warriors who had faced death countless times, now confronted with the possibility of watching a fellow soldier die despite their best efforts. "We move now," Morrison decided. "Doc, can you keep her stable during movement?" Williams nodded grimly while preparing a portable 4-bag and additional medical supplies. The team would have to carry Maria through 3 kilometers of enemy territory while providing continuous medical care, a task that seemed nearly impossible. Dr. Hassan surprised everyone by standing up and gathering his own medical supplies. "I come with you," he declared in English. "She needs doctor." Morrison started to refuse. They couldn't be responsible for a civilian in a combat zone, but Hassan's determined expression brooked no argument. "I kept her alive 3 days. I not leave her now." The extraction began at 0347 hours, with Morrison's team moving in a tactical formation designed to protect their wounded cargo. 4 SEALs carried Maria on an improvised stretcher while Williams walked alongside, monitoring her vital signs and adjusting her 4-drip. Dr. Hassan stayed close, providing medical advice and helping to stabilize the stretcher over rough terrain. The first challenge came immediately, the partially collapsed stairway that had nearly blocked their entry to the basement. The SEALs had to carefully maneuver Maria's stretcher through the debris while maintaining her 4 lines and avoiding any jarring movements that could worsen her internal injuries. Williams whispered constant updates about her condition, his voice tense with concern. As they emerged from the hospital into the pre-dawn darkness, Morrison's Overwatch team reported movement in the surrounding buildings. Phoenix 1, multiple contacts moving to intercept. Looks like someone spotted our insertion. The insurgents were closing in. Drawn by the unusual activity around their former stronghold, the team began moving through the streets as quickly as Maria's condition would allow. Every few hundred meters, Williams would call a halt to check her pulse and breathing, making minute adjustments to her medication while the security team maintained a protective perimeter. Dr. Hassan proved invaluable during these stops, his medical knowledge complementing Williams' emergency training. Halfway to the extraction point, disaster struck. An insurgent patrol rounded a corner directly ahead of their route, forcing Morrison's team to take cover behind the ruins of a destroyed storefront. The stretcher-bearers gently lowered Maria to the ground while Williams continued his medical care, even as automatic weapons fire began echoing through the narrow streets. Contact front. Multiple enemy personnel. Morrison's point man called over the radio. The SEALs returned fire with their suppressed weapons, trying to eliminate the threat without alerting additional insurgent forces. But the gunfight was exactly what they had hoped to avoid, noise that would draw every enemy fighter in the area to their location. During the firefight, Maria's condition deteriorated rapidly. Williams detected an irregular heartbeat and dropping blood pressure that suggested internal bleeding had resumed. "Commander, she's going into shock. We need to move now, or she's not going to make it." The medic's voice carried the urgency of someone who had seen too. Many patients slip away despite his best efforts. Morrison made another impossible decision. While half his team continued engaging the insurgents, he led the stretcher-bearers in a desperate sprint toward the extraction point. Abandoning stealth in favor of speed, Dr. Hassan ran alongside them, his aged body somehow keeping pace through sheer determination to save his patient. Behind them, the remaining SEALs provided covering fire as they conducted a fighting withdrawal, using their superior training and equipment to hold off increasingly aggressive insurgent attacks. The sound of gunfire was attracting more enemy fighters from across the district, turning their extraction route into a running battle. "Nightbird, Phoenix 1? We need immediate extraction. Package is critical and we have heavy contact." Morrison's radio call was answered by the welcome sound of helicopter rotors in the distance. The extraction birds were coming in early, abandoning their original timeline in response to the deteriorating situation, with the landing zone now only 500 meters away. The stretcher team pushed through their exhaustion and fear, driven by the knowledge that Maria's life hung in the balance. Williams continued his medical care even while running, somehow managing to maintain her line and monitor her vital signs despite the chaos around them. As they reached the extraction point, a small clearing between destroyed buildings, Morrison could see the helicopters approaching through the darkness, their pilots flying dangerously low to avoid insurgent fire. Maria Rodriguez had survived 14 bullets, 3 days in hell, and a running battle through enemy territory. Now everything depended on whether they could get her to a proper medical facility before her battered body finally gave up its fight for life.